Chapter 9. The Armies of the Night. The doctor sprang back into a corner, clutching the oil lamp. Kathleen fired a burst of shells into the monster's thrashing form. It spun round, screeching but unharmed. "Get back!" shouted the doctor. He was quickly unscrewing the base of the lamp. "Hoy!" Ace dodged in front of the creature, waving her arms. "Fee Trench, you still in there?" The monster paused, as if listening. Then, as Ace drew closer, a tentacle flashed out. Ace rolled aside. A barrage of plasma fire engulfed the creature, and small pieces of it flew in all directions. But still it advanced, backing the travelers into the other side of the office. "Excuse me!" the doctor shouted. The tentacled thing turned. A burst of flame whooshed across the office, catching the creature full on. The doctor was spraying fire from his mouth, holding the naked oil lamp near his lips. The creature ignited and reeled for a moment, screaming. "Now!" shouted the doctor. "Everybody out!" He threw aside the lamp and leapt the barrier where the window had been. Ace and the travelers followed. They sprinted along an aisle. The creature, still ablaze, followed, its tentacles hissing ahead of it, one lashing a book from the wall by Ace's cheek. Ahead, Jan and Rosha were standing either side of the aisle, their weapons drawn. "Get out!" shouted Ace. She was amazed to see that Jan was shaking his head. He slapped her shoulder as she ran up to him. "Go on, we'll cover you." "But go on!" He levered a foot to her bottom and pushed, sending her dashing ahead. As the creature galloped up the aisle, Jan and Rosha looked at each other. It was nearing them. In a second, it would be on them. "Now!" shouted Jan. They both kicked out the wedges from the shelves they had spent 5 minutes maneuvering into position. The twin metal constructions collapsed in front of the approaching beast, blocking its path. They turned and ran after the others. The doors of the library burst open, and the doctor dashed down the stairs. He ran straight into James Miller's chest. The travelers found themselves surrounded by a party of guards, who instantly went into firing postures. There was an explosion from inside the library. "Messy!" shouted the doctor. Miller nodded. "We better get a fire crew in there." "No. Let it burn. There's something in there that doesn't die easily." Ace looked around the soldiers, exasperated. "Hey!" she called. "Leave off! We're on your side!" Miller waved a hand, and the guards stepped back. The travelers lowered their weapons also. "Sontarans," smiled Miller. "Always leave chaos in their wake." The doctor frowned, puzzled. Then suddenly his face broke into an amazed smile. "The person that told you there were Sontarans involved." "Yes." "What was wrong with their arm?" Miller stared at the doctor. Cale took a key from his pocket and switched off the communications deck of the orbital platform. His shuttle had arrived only minutes before. The platform was a small post, crewed by 3 troopers. It maintained a geostationary orbit above Joycetown, and was mainly used as an early warning station, its sensors trained in the direction of the Draconian Empire. The tiny control room was crammed with sophisticated detection equipment. "It's only for an hour or so," Cale reassured the duty officer. "I've got to realign the sensors to keep the planet's surface. You read the letter of authorization?" The man nodded. He and Cale were employed by the same mining company. He gestured to Cale's plaster cast. "What happened to your arm?" he asked. "Broken," Cale sighed, pulling open the sensor panel with his free hand. "Mechanical accident."
"He knows where the book is,"
hissed a voice in the steaming darkness.
"But so do we,"
hissed a second voice.
"It is of no matter,"
added the third voice.
"We have misled the military, and now blinded their detectors. The doctor cannot help. Soon he will not be able to help himself."
Miller had been trying to contact the orbital platform for an hour now. He threw down the communicator in disgust, then quickly picked it up again. "Judith, tell Howarth to take a copter down to the equatorial dock. He can requisition a shuttle and get up there." "What? Damn it! What is it?" Ace asked. The travelers and the soldiers were gathered in Miller's HQ, the former looking around at the corporate logo suspiciously. "Cale took the last bloody one today," Miller sighed. "The rest are all in for repair." "Yes." The doctor was sitting cross-legged on Miller's desk, his eyes closed. "Of course, they would be." "You could call for reinforcements," suggested Moira. "Aye, I have done. I've used the priority link. Instantaneous communication, you see. Absolutely new."
"Really?"
The doctor sighed. "And very expensive, too, lad. But the 6th Fleet won't get here for a week. Till then, we're virtually blind."
Since our eyes are closed, the doctor murmured, opening his, now would be a good time to get some sleep. And I need to go visiting. Can you take us back to the travelers' camp? Miller looked around the ragamuffins in his office and sighed. Yes, doctor. I'll get a bulk flyer together. Anything else? The doctor considered. A bottle of metal cleaner, he decided. The night air was sweet, cool breezes shuffling the grasslands under the moon. Ace and Jan led their horses down the ramp of the bulk flyer, a huge VTOL aircraft, towards the applauding travelers, who were waving from around the bonfire. I want a word with you, Ace said. I want to get back into my bed, Jan grinned back. Ace would have answered in similar fashion, but the doctor appeared out of the crowd and took her arm. Sorry, he mumbled. I know it's late, but now I know where my book is. It's vital that I go and find it. Do you want to come with me? Of course I do, Ace told him. Who else is going to ride shotgun for you? Who indeed, muttered the doctor, leading her off. I could come along, began Jan, but the two adventurers were already selecting horses. Ace turned back to him and blew a kiss. Wait up for me, she called. Need some company? Asked Rosha, leaning on Jan's shoulder. Yes, said the traveler wryly. I think I do. What'd you get from the thingy in the flask? Ace asked as they trotted out of the valley. I've been examining the filament in the TARDIS labs. It's very complex, highly specialized. The structure almost transcends biology. The cells contain something like the symbiotic nuclei that enable Time Lords to regenerate. They can control vast amounts of energy. The fibers can burn through matter, interface with living cells. They're all part of the intelligence of the enemy. And is this vacuum church place in on it too? Yes. So why not raid the place? Because it wouldn't really achieve anything. Wipe the smile off that creep Phaedrus's face. It would. But what's more important, winning or feeling good about yourself? Doesn't one lead to the other, Professor? Not always. Ace could see that the subject was closed. Any word about that guy, Kale? No. Miller was trying to requisition a ship. He hasn't succeeded, of course. Couldn't we just hop up there in the TARDIS? We could, but that could be exactly what the enemy wants us to do. Who are the enemy, anyway? Hush. Later. Walls have ears. Even tent walls. The doctor urged his horse into a gallop, and Ace followed. They thundered across the moonlit plains, swapping the lead, until the two companions saw the brilliant silver arch, picked out in the ghostly light. The doctor slowed his horse to a stop, and dismounted. Ace did likewise. They led their animals towards the distant tents of the archaeologists. The doctor began to talk about his friendship with Christopher Marlowe, and, although Ace could see that his thoughts were mostly elsewhere, she asked questions, and they laughed together. After a while, she felt confident enough to ask the question. Professor, do you always pick the people who are going to travel with you? Sometimes. Often they pick me. Why? I want to stay with you, but well, me and Jan, we're... The doctor stopped walking. I see, he said. You'd better decide. Pathways. We can never take both. You mean I have to decide between you? Yes. The doctor wasn't looking at her. My granddaughter did, a long time ago. She'd fallen in love with an Earthman. Like marrying a mayfly. Ace heard such bitterness in the doctor's voice then, that she winced. But me and Jan, you think you've fallen in love. One day you'll wake up and he'll be gone. That touched a nerve. Shut up! What the hell do you know about love? You don't do it, do you? Not lately. Ace let go of her horse, and pulled the doctor around to face her. What are you getting so worked up about? I didn't have it all for the bloody Dalek. Would it have made a difference? She slapped him. Hard. The doctor turned away. Ace stood there, shuddering. She wanted to hold him, to ask him why he was like this suddenly. Why had he changed so much? What could she do to make it all better? Oh, God, why had she hit him? The doctor spoke first, quietly, his back to her. I was shown the worst time of my life in pewter space, he said. I was alone, wandering in the vortex, dying. It was terrible. I don't want to be alone. It sounded like the hardest thing the doctor had ever said. Ace rubbed a hand across her eyes. You're not alone. Who says you have to be alone? Where am I going to go? With him, the doctor whispered. Ace was astonished. You're jealous, she cried. You're actually jealous. No. The doctor turned around, his face creased with tension. I don't want to see you hurt. There's evil on this world. Infinite evil. Well, it's got nothing to do with Jan. He's a good person. We've got a lot in common. Have we? Perhaps. But if you stay with him, you'll be hurt. Badly. Sighing, Ace took the doctor's scarf in her hands. I am never, ever going to leave you. You needn't worry, you sad old man. Come here. They hugged. Ace felt the doctor relax, but only slightly. This was way disturbing, the whole bit. Usually he was up on the whole game, way beyond anything dull and stupid like jealousy. She was used to him being in control. The idea that he wasn't was scary. It wasn't cool to be jealous. She remembered how she met the first guy that Julian had gone out with, and had tried so hard not to show the jealousy that Jules had said she was trying to chat the guy up. If only he'd known. Or maybe he had. Will you think about giving Jan a lift? She asked. Please, I can't choose between you. The doctor put a hand on her cheek and touched it gently. You won't have to choose, he whispered. Ace saw the infinite sadness in his eyes. Hello! A cheery voice boomed from behind them. Bernice stood there, waving a trowel. You really should have said, Benny muttered, rummaging through a pile of books by the side of her bunk. Ah! She blew the dust off a slim, leather-bound volume. Gold leaf on the color declared it to be the papers of Felsikar. The doctor grabbed the book and leafed quickly through it. Ace and Benny peered over his shoulders. The monks of Felsikar have taken it as their mission to preserve some of the most dangerous objects and information in the universe, he said. They've been doing that for 250,000 years. Ah, now wait. Benny raised a finger. That's before human beings started standing upright. Too right, Ace grinned at her. Broadens your mind, doesn't it? She'd been looking at the doctor for some recognition of their conversation outside the dig, but he was acting like it had never happened. Maybe that was for the best. This is a collection of some random manuscripts from the collection. They somehow found their way off planet, and, as such curious do, hung around for centuries. Somebody brought them to human space, and they were bound in accordance with this note, attached to the inner corner. He glanced at a dirty post-it note that was firmly stuck in the book. Oh dear, one of mine. Benny laughed out loud. You mean you had to tell them what the book was called? Probably so I could find it now. I must remember to get around to doing that. Now. The doctor began to flip quickly through the pages. Recipes for Rigel, a palimpsest of poems, notes on Dalek design down the decades. Benny shared a smile with Ace. The various manuscripts bound into the book were in a dozen different languages. Here we are, written in Draconian on the top of the page. In felt tip. I'd never do that. This must have been done by a very crude future incarnation. Benny was about to ask. Ace put a finger to her lips. The doctor was reading. This is a volume of Heavenite poetry, written in Heavenite, with Gallifreyan translation by... My goodness! Castellan Lode! She was the greatest literary historian the Time Lords ever had, before the laws of time were enforced. Some of them must have visited here. Poetry, Ace sighed. Not very useful, is it? About as useful as the Rosetta Stone, gasped Benny. You know, that wasn't too important to document. Wednesday did the washing, etc., but it was written in both hieroglyphics and Greek. The archaeologists back then knew Greek. To read anything else in heaven, I get it. But if you're going to write this, Professor, why didn't you add anything more useful? Because I remembered that this was what I found. Tricky thing, temporal paradox. You can't do deals with time. Only with death, Ace muttered. The doctor frowned and fumbled for a pencil. How's the dig going? He asked Benny. Not long left. She poured cups of coffee from a flask for herself and Ace, and motioned the doctor to use her folding desk. We haven't found anything new, but did you realize how thoroughly the observatory's covered in Heavenite writing? It's been written everywhere in a tiny hand, burnt into the walls, and the telescope. I know. The doctor placed his can of metal cleaner on the desk. Ace slurped her coffee and grinned at Benny's surprised expression. Fancy a walk? She asked. Indeed I do, the archaeologist said, getting to her feet. I think. Should I ask him if I do? You do, said the doctor, absorbed in the scroll. Ace hoped that he was joking. The two women wandered towards the arch, its slim shadow falling over them as they passed between it and the moon. They exchanged information about the events of the past few days. Bernice asked if Ace ever knew what the doctor was doing. He's playing, Ace told her. Playing chess against some alien thingy. Usually it's a bit one-sided, but this time... She hugged herself against the cold. This time I think the other lot are as fast as he is. And he's losing his touch. He didn't half lay into me just now. What about? Benny stuffed her hands into her pockets. Jan... The doctor's getting very sad about that. Are you two... Yeah, very. Can't help you there. Total failure, boy-wise. Benny leaned back and stared at the arch. Why can't you beat a man like that thing? Beautiful, elegant, doesn't talk much. Yeah, I could get used to that. Benny laughed. When I was at the academy, I went a bit wild. Didn't like the way they wanted to make us all into troopers. I certainly can shoot, but I prefer not to have to. Can't stand soldiers, guns, all that business. I don't know. Guns are okay if I'm using them. So are soldiers. Prefer grenades, though. Benny raised an eyebrow. I think we'll agree to differ there. I went AWOL and hid in the woods by the academy. They couldn't find me.
Word got out, though, and after a while, girls at the academy started to visit me for advice. Boys, periods, anti-aircraft weapons. I was sort of a gym slip guru. Anyway, a boy started to visit with the girls. I taught him everything I knew. Simon, his name was. We rode about in the bracken a bit. I fell in love. He betrayed me to the authorities. Typical, Ace nodded. But me and Jana are going to be okay. We're different. That's what they all say. Ace shook her head. She didn't want to hear that. This Simon, was he a first? Oh, yes. And, apart from a couple of times when my heart has overruled my head, the last. The academy decided that I was obviously qualified for frontline service, made me the youngest private in the corps, and put me on a troop ship bound for Capella. You fought the Daleks? Ace was impressed. No. I jumped ship in an escape pod. Found myself on some strange colony halfway to nowhere. You and me both. Pain, isn't it? It is. I started to work with an archaeologist unit. Now, this is the point in the story where I do something very bad. I faked my qualifications. You mean you're not a real professor? That's right. Do you know, I've never told anybody about that before. Ace felt suitably honored. Benny was looking at her a little nervously, as if she might rush down the diggings and yell the news to everyone. It's okay, she smiled. Neither's the professor. How'd you meet him? Well, Ace took a deep breath. I was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar. Cale slid into the ventilation duct and dragged the access port closed behind him. From the ready room of the platform, he could hear the three troopers discussing how long it would be before the communications net was back online. They were merry and lackadaisical, waiting out the week before their replacements arrived. In the darkness, Cale snapped open the catches of his false arm and took it off, removing the bulky plaster. From his shoulder socket, gray filaments relaxed and swayed, no longer having to support the weight of the limb. Cale opened the shoulder end of the metal arm and reached into the cool internal chamber with his fingers. One by one, he removed 3 thin white filaments. They twisted in his grasp and sang to him. Ace and Benny climbed down the ladder into the excavations, Benny nodding to Clive and several others of the team, who were still carefully sifting material from various areas of the floor. They were visibly tired at this early hour of the morning, working by the light of chemical lamps. Trouble is, Benny confided, there's nothing disused or destroyed to find. All the tiny objects we find are discarded, and generally, we can't make head or tail of them. The Heavenites must have had one hell of a recycling plan. Come on through to the observatory. They stepped carefully through the doorway into the chamber beyond. Ace went over to the pile of bones in the corner. My fault, Benny told Ace. Not good archaeology. She was a skeleton. She'd eaten that parchment the doctors got. I had to let her out. I've got a thing about people being locked up. Haven't we all? Ace sighed. The doctor was carefully looking between the slip of parchment-like material and the papers of Felsikar, making notes. A head poked into the tent. It was Paul Mars, the archaeology student who had given his name to the observatory door. Oh, hiya. Sorry, I just wanted to get a probe. Come in, the doctor finished his note with a flourish. I've just finished. Paul reached into an open pocket of Benny's toolkit and pulled out a thin rod. Who are you? He asked. I haven't seen you about. I'm the doctor, and this is my friend... Oh, no, she's not here. The doctor looked around, puzzled. He seemed to make a decision. I was just deciphering this note. Have a look. The student glanced at the page of the doctor's notebook. It's not Pride and Prejudice, is it? But then, what is? Very few people would criticize the literary style. Well, everybody's different, aren't they? Paul shrugged. I was born to deconstruct. How are you on ethics? Would you say that it was worth sacrificing one person to save a whole galaxy? Depends on the person, I suppose. A very human answer. The doctor nodded. Thank you. Paul grinned, gave the doctor back his piece of paper, and left. On his way back to the dig, he thought about what the strange little man had said, and started to feel uneasy. A few minutes after he'd resumed the examination of the tunnel floor, the doctor wandered past, on his way to the observatory. No, listen, I thought about it more, and the Time Lord looked at him as if they hadn't met before. He doffed his hat. Hello, I'm the doctor, and this is... He checked himself. Ah, no, she's in there. I better go and find her. And he walked on. Paul shook his head and got back to work. Ace was looking at the masses of Heavenite symbols, visible on the observatory walls. They were exactly like those she'd seen in the library and other buildings. I thought those were just decorations. No. The doctor bustled in, glancing around the walls. They're a highly complex alphabet, derived from a representational rather than phonetic source. Have you deciphered our skeleton's dinner? Asked Bernice. Yes. She ate something that disagreed with her. The doctor walked up to the telescope and sprayed it with a metal cleaner solution. "I'll have to translate the contents of this room. So what does the note say?" Ace asked, exasperated. "It says," the doctor pulled it from his pocket once more and held it up to scrutiny, "Forgive me, I cannot or will not take part in the resurrection dance, for I know what it is and what it is about. You who read this, beware Atkitch, which is what they called this world, for we have been abused by our gods. The walls will tell you of the resurrection dance, and will show you how to predict when the time has come again. Once again, forgive me. I must imprison myself now, lest all this work be for nothing." "She doesn't sign her name." "Brave woman," Ace sighed. "She must have written all this stuff on the walls. She burnt it in with the same device she used to seal the manacles to the wall," Benny added. "We found some tiny shards of metal, which might be it. Is that important?" "No." The doctor was polishing the telescope with his handkerchief. "This will take a few hours." "Okay, we'll leave you alone. I'll better get back to camp anyway." Ace paused at the door. "She got turned into one of those fungus things, didn't she?" "Yes," the doctor nodded. "That's why she chained herself up and wrote the note on something that wouldn't be dissolved in her stomach, so she wouldn't destroy all this work." "That's horrible," Benny sighed, looking at the bones in the corner. "Respect is due," Ace agreed. Rosha and Jan lay, propped up by cushions, against each other. They were holding hands and listening to the massive radio receiver that Jan had assembled in one corner of his tent. The aerial stretched around the whole canopy. "Eatsland dry and cold," the voice on the radio announced. "Wind force 4, increasing. Lake Wobegon, some rain, becoming dry later. Shepherd Shea, storms towards morning." "When we first came here, we always used to listen to this," Jan whispered. "It makes me feel safe, like somebody's watching over the whole world." Rosha shivered and clutched his hand. "It's just a weather station somewhere, a few people in a hut, drinking coffee in the middle of the night. They're alone too." She closed her eyes and began to cry. "Oh, goddess, why did this have to happen to us?" "What?" Jan cradled her head on his shoulder. "What's wrong? Please tell me. Whatever it is, we can all fight it together." "No, we can't," Rosha wailed. "It's too late. Oh, Jan, take Ace with you and go. Get away from here tonight." "Why?" "Because—" Ace stepped into the tent. She took one look at Jan and Rosha and tried to step out again. Jan leapt up and caught her. "No, come back. It's not—" "I know what it is." Ace smiled gently. "I'll be back in a few minutes, okay?" But Rosha had stood up herself, touching Ace gently on the sleeve. "It's all right," she whispered, wiping her tears with a hand. "I'll go." She stepped outside, but turned back after a moment. "Take good care of him," she whispered. "Don't let anything— keep him safe." "I will," Ace insisted, moved. "I wouldn't ever let—" But Rosha was gone into the night. An hour later, Jan and Ace lay curled in their makeshift bed. Jan was massaging Ace's back, expertly relaxing her muscles. "Don't you ever do that to me again," she said distractedly. "What? Push me out of the way in a fight? Oh, this is what you wanted to say, is it? If it had been anybody else, I'd have smashed their face in. So why not me?" "Because I love you." "Oh." Jan stopped massaging. Ace turned over and looked up at him. "Close your mouth," she said. "I was just thinking about that poor old librarian. He was brave, and he wanted to help us, and somehow the bad guys did that to him. We're not here on holiday. We're going to be in fights again, and I thought I'd tell you tonight. Get it over with, okay?" "Okay." Jan lay down beside her, watching her face. "I love you too." "No, you don't have to say that. I didn't bloody well think I had to. I just do. And we're going to be together, right? Here or in space with your mate. If he lets you. Let's see him stop me." Jan kissed her gently. "He could," Ace whispered. "Let's hope he doesn't want to try. I have something to tell you." "What, you're pregnant?" "Hush, this is serious. You've already told me all your names." "No." Ace closed her eyes. Dory sometimes. And my mum used to call me Dory. That's it. Well, it's time you heard my secret names, if we're going to be together. If you know these, you can steal my heart and soul anyway, but you've already done that. So where's the harm?" Ace hugged him for that. "When I was young, I was Ramanu Pashi, which is a reference to a wild bull in Romani tradition. It means I used to throw myself at lots of women who didn't want me, and succeeded a few times through keeping on trying." "That doesn't suit you now," Ace murmured, not wanting to show Jan how moved she was by all this. "No, that's why I changed it in the last year. I'm now Aradrath, the one big fire. I wanted to have something about my power, and rather than be trivial, I I thought I'd look forward to the time when I'd make a good big fire, one really useful one. I think that's the one I've lit with you. That's beautiful. Ace held him tightly. You're beautiful, and I love you. They made love once more, Ace wondering how it was that she drew strength from this man, how it was that she trusted him just as much, more, than she trusted the doctor. Trust was new for her. Poor Rosha. Ace wondered briefly if she could tolerate a timeshare on Jan's company. Rosha really cared about him, and she was unselfish enough to give him up. Damn it, why did ex-girlfriends never turn out to be complete villains? You'd get more sleep that way. They talked for a while about children's stories after they'd finished, caressing. Jan fell asleep, and Ace rolled over, pulling a book from his pile of reading matter beside the rugs. Byron. Yeah, it would be. She found a page at random. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. Ace read to the sleeping Jan, whispering. Colm Wiley stood at the edge of the traveler's camp, shifting the weight of his plasma rifle from one shoulder to another. He blew into his hands. The travelers took arms on guard duty, as with everything else, and tonight was Colm's turn. He was an ex-Marine, and still sometimes had trouble sleeping, with all the dreams of vaporized blood. He'd given it up for anarchy, and didn't mind wandering the camp at 3 a.m. There was a shuffling noise from out on the perimeter. Colm looked up, past the light of the stake-mounted lamps. Something was moving in the darkness. It might be a herd animal, of course, a grazer wandering up to see what the lights were. But these days it might not be. Colm found the alarm beacon in his pocket, but he didn't press the button. He could see vague shapes now, moving outside the stone circle. Human shapes, swaying listlessly, their steps taking them in a ritualistic circle around the camp. They were moving so quietly. Colm shook his head. He wasn't dreaming. He couldn't make out any features, but there was a whole army of people out there. He tightened his grip on his gun. "Hoy!" he shouted. "Who are you?" The only response was a strange keening sound, right on the edge of audibility. It sliced through the night air like static. With the noise came something else. Colm saw it arriving, a cloud of white fibers, floating in on the breeze, a snowstorm of thin, hairy flecks. It wafted towards the camp, scattering amongst the tents, wrapping around the stones and poles. One of the fibers landed on Colm's glove and twitched. He yelled, throwing off the glove, and hit the alarm button. A blaring siren shrilled out from a speaker attached to a central pole, and travelers began to tumble from their tents, snatching up weapons. They ran towards the sentry point. Ace ran out into the night in a robe, carrying a belt of grenades. She got to Colm before anyone else did. The man was shivering, clutching his hand. "They're going," he gasped. Ace peered out into the murk. In the middle distance, she could make out a parade of retreating figures. "Should we go after them?" asked Alec, running up barefoot. "No," Ace shook her head. "That's a good way to get killed, running after a retreating enemy." Moira and Rosha arrived, in identical black robes. Rosha had been shining a torch ahead of her, gesturing to Moira to be careful. "These things," she cried to Colm. "They're all over the place." "Are they dangerous?" asked the sentry. He showed Rosha his hand. The tiny fiber had somehow gone straight through the glove and was embedded in the flesh of his wrist. "I don't know," the woman whispered, her face filling with fear. "We'll take a look back at my tent. I'll bathe it." She turned to Ace. "Make sure nobody else gets near the fibers, whatever they are." Ace and Moira looked at the number of semi-naked travelers that had gathered around the sentry post. "Bloody fibers again," Ace muttered. "We'll clear a path back to the center," Moira decided. "Everybody follow me, and then take a good look around your own tents." She pointed to 3 blurry travelers with weapons. "I think it'd be an idea if you kept watch until dawn." "They won't be back," muttered Ace. "I think they've done what they came for." "Oh my God!" Jan was drowsily wandering towards them, his feet bare. "What's wrong?" he muttered. "I think the sky fell in just now." Ace ran to him, hopping over fibers, and quickly inspected the soles of his feet. After a moment, she sighed in relief. "You're the luckiest bloody man alive, you are." "Aye, I'm with you, aren't I?" Ace made him walk very carefully back to their tent. Benny had gone back to her tent for a cup of coffee, and was sitting alone, looking at photos. Dad. Where was he? Dead on some frontier world? A wisp of gas in space? Or was he off on some secret mission that nobody knew about? No, that was absolute rubbish. That was just fantasy. Sometimes she thought she'd found leads, descriptions of a man a bit like him. Once she'd walked into a bar and thought she'd seen him across the room. It had turned out to be some old space pirate, but for 5 minutes, how her heart had beaten. Dad. A shadow moved across the surface of the tent. Benny pulled her gun. She slipped quickly outside and relaxed in the moonlight. The doctor was gazing up at the moon, his face full of childish delight. He hadn't noticed her, but was staring up into the sky, his boy's eyes full of moon, and he must have seen so many moons. Benny found herself wishing that she could have fallen in love with somebody like him. As she wished, she knew that she wouldn't. But God, she wanted to be his friend. A burst of shooting stars exploded silently overhead. The doctor gazed at it, and his face fell into an expression of grim determination.
"Bernice," he said, "take me to the place those stars have fallen."
Ace woke suddenly and shook her head, trying to figure out what was a dream and what wasn't. The fibers were real, yeah, and Jan was safely sleeping at her side. Something had woken her up. Christ, if she wasn't so knackered, she wouldn't have been able to sleep in the first place. The sound that had woken her came again, a light tap against the fabric of the tent, like somebody was flicking their finger against it. Ace listened until the tension drained out of her, and she was almost about to fall back to sleep. Then the sound came again. She reached for Jan's gun, afraid. Was this going to be it? Grabbed by fungus monsters in the middle of the night? Hell, let them try. Ace crept up to the tent flap, still wondering if she was dreaming. She undid the whole thing with one tug of the ties, and threw the flap open. Before the tent stood a tall figure in a black shroud. "My God," Ace whispered. "Are you real?" "Indeed." The being held out a whitened hand. "For a while. Come with me." Glancing back at Jan, Ace took Christopher's hand.